He would kiss her secretly in the back hallway, his hand trembling and his heart racing. But when dawn broke and his millionaire parents came down for breakfast, he would turn his face away as if he didn't know her. The girl who spent hours cleaning the floor of the house where she wasn't welcome felt colder in his eyes than on the days when she walked home. It didn't hurt that she was poor. It hurt that she was ignored by those who said they loved her. And in the silence between the early morning kiss and the detour at breakfast, the greatest wound of his youth was born. No one there knew that the love he hid would also be the pain he would never forget. Because when she left no trace. Only an emptiness in the exact place where he never had the courage to look, her heart. Now he is there, in a well-cut suit, toasting with friends in a New York penthouse. Everyone calls him a winner, an heir, a lucky man. But no crystal glass can erase the bitter taste of the shame he felt for loving her in front of her parents. No luxurious laughter fills the silence of the last night when she cried alone in the kitchen while he smiled upstairs. The world applauds the man he has become, but she left before she saw what he has become. Because the real punishment was not having lost her. It was having pushed her away. And it is in this unexpected reunion, so many years later, that karma does not scream. He just looks into her eyes, the way she looked, and he avoided her. If you feel that this story has something to say to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and come with us, because what is to come may speak directly to your heart. She arrived with her backpack strapped to her shoulder and her eyes hidden under the brim of a worn cap. It was her first day in that house where nothing belonged to her, not the furniture, not the silence, not the floor she would scrub every morning. Her mother had recommended her for the job as a helper in the mansion where she had been cleaning for years, a white house with windows bigger than any room she had ever had in her life. It was there, among the silverware and the marble stairs, that she saw him for the first time, a boy with warm eyes and a distracted posture, who didn't seem arrogant, but also didn't seem like the type to notice who was coming from below. He came down the stairs with his cell phone in one hand and a coffee in the other, almost tripped over the bucket she was holding, apologized softly, and disappeared. But she didn't forget the tone of his voice. It was the kind of voice that carried the whole world, but without knowing it. In the first few days, she kept her eyes lowered, did her work in silence, avoided the hallways where he walked. But there was something that pulled her. Maybe it was the way he closed his eyes when he heard music. Maybe it was the way he left notes for his mother, thanking her for the snacks. He was different from the rest of the family who barely looked the servants in the eye. She began to notice the times he came down, the paths he took to the kitchen, the sounds he made when he was alone. Without realizing it, she was learning his presence as if it were music. And then, one afternoon, he came into the kitchen while she was washing the dishes. His mother was out, his father too. It was rare to see him there. He took a glass, excused himself, and asked if she liked movies. She froze, and she said yes, but that she had never been. He laughed as if he hadn't expected that answer, and he left. The next day he left a ticket on the sink. "Only if you want to," the note said. She put the paper in her pocket and didn't have the courage to go. The next day he didn't show up in the kitchen, nor the day after that, but she saw from afar the way he looked at her now, as if he had understood that she was more than someone who washed dishes. And then a silent game began, made of glances in the reflection of the windows, of silences that said more than words. She knew it was wrong. He was the boss's son. She was just the daughter of the maid. But the heart knows no hierarchies. The heart, when it beats against all the rules. And hers no longer beat alone. In the days that followed, the silence between them became a bridge. When she came into the living room to dust the furniture, he would never look away. He would stay there, pretending to watch TV, but his fingers would tremble when she walked behind the sofa. One day she accidentally dropped a book, and he bent down at the same time to pick it up. Their hands touched. It was only for a second, but it was enough for them both to move away as if they had touched fire. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, remembering the feeling. He didn't sleep either. He went out for a run at 3 in the morning and came back sweating, trying to understand why the touch of someone so far from his world left him breathless. From then on, the words began to flow. Simple things. Good morning. It's really hot today. Do you like to read? She felt alive. For the first time, she wasn't invisible in that house. He, on the other hand, found himself faced with a feeling he had never experienced with the girls at the club or at the parties. With her, everything seemed more real, cleaner, more human, and that was what scared him. One Tuesday, while her parents were away, she was in the kitchen peeling potatoes. He came in with a different expression. He didn't say anything. He just came closer and placed his hand on hers, slowly. "Have you ever been kissed?" She didn't answer. Her eyes spoke for her. And he came closer, placing his lips on hers, with a delicacy that seemed to apologize before he even made a mistake. The kiss was brief, but the world stopped. When it ended, he smiled and ran away like a teenager. She stood there, her hands still over the sink, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. After that day, everything changed. They would meet during recess, in the yard, in the hallways, but never in front of his parents. When his family was there, he would go back to being the same distant boy. It hurt her, but she pretended it didn't. After all, it was better to have him like this than not to have him at all, or at least that's what she told herself. Until one Sunday morning, while cleaning the windows of the balcony, she heard his mother say to a friend, "These poor girls sometimes get fooled. They think a smile is an invitation. We need to stop that soon." She didn't cry, but something inside her broke. And for the first time, she began to wonder if the love she felt was real, or just another borrowed luxury that didn't belong to her. The following week, he noticed something different about her. She still did everything the same way she had before, with the same precision in her movements, the same delicacy when arranging the cushions and polishing the silverware, but there was something in her eyes that he didn't recognize. It wasn't anger. It was distance, as if she had retreated to a place inside herself that he no longer had access to, and that made him uneasy. He tried to find her in the same places as before, tried to repeat her gestures, her smiles, even left another note on the sink, silent, wordless, with only a small drawing of a flower. But she didn't respond. In the hallway, she looked away. In the kitchen, she limited herself to what was necessary. And deep down, something began to hurt. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be ignored. He felt what she probably felt every time he changed his tone in front of his parents. He tried to talk. One day, he came into the kitchen early and said in a whisper, "I miss you." She looked at him but didn't say anything, and that silence hurt more than any scream. The next day, she didn't go to work, and the day after that, neither. Her mother said she had the flu, but he knew it was a lie. That was protection. It was a shield. It was an escape. When she came back, she was thinner. Her eyes were deeper, but she was still beautiful. But she wasn't the same anymore. He tried to get closer again. He offered her some tea. He told a silly joke. He showed her a book. She smiled slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Then he asked, "Why did you move away?" She hesitated. Then, without changing her voice, she said, "Because I realized that your world only wants me at dawn, and I deserve more than being a secret." He remained silent. He didn't know what to answer, because it was true. He was afraid of what his parents would say, afraid of what his friends would think, afraid of looking at her and seeing what he himself wasn't. Courage, that's what she was made of, a silent courage that didn't ask permission to feel. And for the first time, he felt small, not because of his social position, but because of his character. That night, he went down to the kitchen. He sat on the floor leaning against the refrigerator door, and he cried. He cried like a boy who didn't know where he had lost the only thing that truly made him feel whole. She, in the room on the other side of the city, was also crying, but not for him. She was crying for herself, for having loved someone so much that he hid her, and she promised herself that it would be the last time. Time passed like cloudy days, slow and shapeless. She went on with her life, looking for new jobs, attending night classes, trying to rebuild the pieces of herself that were left in that White House. He, on the other hand, pretended to be normal. He smiled at parties, got good grades, met his father's expectations, but inside, everything was absent. In the hallways of the mansion, everything reminded him of her: the smell of coconut soap, the sound of keys jingling on her belt, the light shadow that appeared in the morning when everyone was still asleep. One day he went down to the kitchen and noticed that someone had left the glass out of place. That was enough to make him remember the way she organized everything with an invisible order. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. Not to his parents, not to his friends. He kept everything silent. And silence, as we know, does not pass. She, in another part of the city, began to take care of herself. She started walking in the morning, reading in the afternoon, studying at night. She made new friends. He had heard other stories, but no matter how hard he tried, there was still a corner of his heart that belonged to him, not out of desire but out of memory, because memory, when marked with pain and affection at the same time, refuses to be forgotten. Meanwhile, he collected empty smiles. The girls his father praised, the ones his friends wanted to introduce him to, none of them lasted more than a weekend. None of them had the eyes that made him feel seen. And then came his mother's birthday. The house was filled with guests, flower, arrangements, hired waiters. Ironically, she had been hired by a third-party company to serve at that event. When he entered the mansion again, the floor seemed to shake. Everything was the same, and, at the same time, different. She was now wearing the company uniform, no longer the simple apron. Her gaze was firmer, her walk more confident. When he saw her from the top of the stairs, he almost dropped his glass. He froze. She pretended not to notice. She walked past him with a polite smile. But his eyes weren't shaking anymore. He went downstairs and tried to reach her. "Are you back?" She answered in a firm voice, "Just for today. I'm working." And she left. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be on the other side of indifference, and it wasn't a comfortable place. The party went on, but not him. He stood there for minutes, staring at the closed kitchen door. He understood then that time doesn't heal everything. It only heals what is light. What is deep transforms, and she wasn't the same anymore, but he was still the boy who hid her, and maybe now it was too late to be more than that. She finished her shift without looking back. When she walked through the gates of the mansion, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders, as if that house had finally lost its power to shrink her. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She took the crowded bus back home with the strange feeling of having overcome something that had previously crushed her. He, on the other hand, stayed until the end of the party, but he couldn't remember any faces, any songs, any conversations. His mind only went back to the moment when she politely ignored him. That version of her was new, stronger, more distant, and infinitely more painful for those who had once held her in their arms. On Monday, he looked up the name of the outsourced company. He called, made excuses. He said he had lost a personal item and asked if the dark-haired girl who had served him on Saturday was available. The attendant replied that she couldn't give out employee information. He thanked her, hung up, and felt frustration spread through his chest. For days, he tried to find her again on social media, in the neighborhoods where she lived, in his old contact lists. Nothing. It was as if she had disappeared from the world, or worse, only from his world. She, in turn, also thought about him. Not like before, not with the youthful hope she had at the beginning. She thought with the maturity of someone who understood that not every feeling is enough to keep someone close. She now worked in events, studied to become a nurse, and took care of her mother with affection and silence. But sometimes, at the end of the day, lying in the small room with the poorly sealed window, she remembered the kiss in the kitchen, and how he made her feel seen. That memory was sweet, but it also served as a warning. Love is not who hides you. Love is who honors you, and she deserved that. He, on the Other hand, surrounded by luxury and noise, realized that time does not erase what was unresolved. The image of her walking with a firm posture through the mansion, as if she no longer belonged to that past, was now a ghost that followed him in the hallways, in the mirrors, in his dreams. He tried to talk to his mother, tried to disguise it, tried to forget. But nothing worked, so he wrote a letter, not to deliver it, just to relieve the pain. In it, he told everything, his fear, his cowardice, his regret. He folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and carried it with him for days like someone carrying guilt without a place. But what he didn't know yet was that sometimes forgiveness doesn't come when you ask for it. It comes when you deserve it. And he still had a long way to go before he deserved to be forgiven. Time, with its mania for putting everything in its place, pushed them both in opposite directions. She started working at a small clinic as a receptionist. She was close to TE. The patients learned to care, to listen, to observe signs of pain that were not always visible. Little by little, she discovered a strength within herself that she had previously mistaken for weakness. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Not to him, not to herself. He, on the other hand, inherited his father's position in the family business. He got an office with a view of the city, a team that feared him more than they respected him, a routine of numbers and meetings that did not fulfill him. Sometimes he looked out the window and wondered where she was. Time took the days, but it did not take the memory. One Saturday, she found a letter in her backpack. A patient had left it by mistake. It was addressed to her grandson, and it spoke of longing, love, and regret. That letter touched her in a strange way. When she finished reading it, she wanted to write it too. But she did not. Instead, he prayed. He asked God to heal everything that still hurt in silence. And he kept going. He, in one of his cold meetings, heard a new employee say that he was on duty at a small clinic and that there was a very caring girl there who seemed born to take care of people. Her name echoed like thunder. That same day, he researched the clinic. He called, invented a pain, asked for an appointment, and made an appointment. When he arrived, his heart was beating wildly. She was at the reception, more mature, more serene, and yet with that same look that always dismantled him. She recognized him immediately, but she didn't smile. She just followed protocol. "Full name," he answered. "Health insurance." He hesitated. "Private." She wrote it down. "You can wait." He sat down, but he couldn't stop looking at her, and she, although she pretended to be normal, felt her breath catch every time their eyes almost met. When he was called for triage, he stood up slowly. He stopped in front of her and said softly, "Thank you for not forgetting me at my worst." She looked up firmly and replied, "It was precisely because you didn't forget me that I had to leave," and she went back to typing. He left without saying anything else. In the car, he took a deep breath. For the first time, he understood what love that respects the other person's time was. And that day, he didn't swear to win her back. He just swore to become someone she would be proud to have loved one day. The brief reunion at the clinic was not a new beginning, but it was not the end either. After that day, he did not seek her out again. He did not call, write, or show up unexpectedly, and strangely, this touched her more than any statement. It was as if he had finally understood that her time needed to be respected. She continued working, studying, smiling more lightly. Her co-workers admired her, her patients asked for her, and that deep pain no longer lived inside her chest. There was still memory, yes, but now it was just that, an old memory, like a scar that no longer bleeds. As for him, at the top of the mirrored buildings he frequented, he began to change. Not for her, but for himself. He began to listen more, look into her eyes, review his friendships and attitudes. He went to therapy, faced his pride, reconciled himself with his own shadow. He began to visit his mother more often, tend to his grandfather's garden, relearn the value of simple things. Some nights, he still found himself thinking about her, not with the desire to have her back, but with a serene gratitude for everything he had learned in her absence. It was then that one day, by chance, he learned that she had been accepted into a nursing school. A mutual friend mentioned it in passing at an informal meeting. He smiled, genuinely happy. That same week, he bought a technical book on the health area, wrapped it in a simple piece of paper, and left it at the clinic's reception with a short note. "Congratulations on your achievement. May you bring care and dignity wherever you go." He didn't sign it. He didn't expect a reply. And when she received the package, she knew immediately who had sent it. She touched the paper as if she were touching it to say goodbye. She didn't cry. She just smiled. It was as if the universe had finally given her the scene she needed to close that chapter. Because there are pains that cannot be resolved with reunions or apologies. Some pains are resolved when life shows that the person who once broke you can also grow, not to come back, but to move on. That night, she walked to the rooftop of her apartment building, looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. She felt light, she felt whole, and for the first time, she understood that true love can also be the kind of love that learns to let go. And across the city, he did the same, looking up at the sky, silent, as if that moment connected them one last time. There were no more promises. There was peace. Months passed. She started college classes with enthusiasm, new notebooks, and renewed courage. She always sat at the front, took precise notes, and gradually gained the respect of her teachers. She was the student who arrived before everyone else and left last. She was thirsty to learn, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. She wanted a decent future, something she built with her own hands. At the same time, she still worked at the clinic to pay for her studies and help her mother, who now smiled more. He, on the other hand, had changed jobs, left his father's company, and started a small social project, inspired by stories he had heard from former employees. He wanted to do something meaningful, something that, in some way, would bring him closer to the humanity he had discovered too late. Little by little, they both found their paths, different paths but equally necessary, and then one rainy afternoon the two crossed paths again. Not like before, not by forced destiny, but because the world sometimes turns just so that certain souls can meet again in a mature way. She was accompanying an elderly man to a hospital exam session as part of her internship. He was there to donate blood. When their eyes met, there was a brief silence, an unhurried acknowledgement. He waved. She waved too, and they smiled. That was all. But there was everything there. After that, they met again in the hospital hallways, always with kindness, without any past hanging over their heads. She no longer needed to hide what she felt, because what she felt was lightness. He no longer carried guilt, but deep respect. And one of those afternoons, while they were having coffee in the cafeteria, she said, "You've become a handsome man." He smiled shyly. "You always were. It just took you a while to realize it." They laughed. The coffee was finished, and each went back to their shifts. There were no promises, requests, or romantic endings. But there was truth. And truth, when it comes after so much pain, has an almost sacred flavor. Later, he saw her caring for a sick child. He noticed her patience, the tenderness in her touch, the firmness in her voice. And there she understood what had always attracted him. She had never needed luxury, because she carried within herself the rarest of things, dignity. Meanwhile, she saw him from afar, laughing with the volunteers, organizing boxes of food for the pediatric ward. She thought about everything they had been through, everything they had endured, and felt a peace she had not felt in a long time. Not because she still loved him, but because she knew that love sometimes is about wishing the best for others, even from afar. Over the following months, the occasional interaction between the two created a new form of connection. There were no more hidden kisses or whispered promises. There was respect. There was admiration. A kind of love that does not require constant presence, but rather flourishes in freedom. Sometimes they would have lunch together in the cafeteria. Other times they would just exchange glances from a distance amid the hustle and bustle of the hospital. But every time they passed each other, there was a beautiful silence. The kind of silence that is not heavy, that does not embarrass. It simply welcomes. He began to learn more about her routine, about the books she read, the dreams she nurtured, and she, little by little, discovered in him a man who truly listened, who had buried the arrogance of the past, who knew how to apologize with his eyes. One day, she sat next to him in the hospital garden, exhausted after a difficult shift. He held out a bottle of water and said, "You make this place seem lighter." She smiled, without saying anything. At that very moment, a lady who was passing by stopped and commented, "You two make such a beautiful couple." They both laughed without correcting themselves and let the phrase hang in the air like something that didn't need to be discussed. But even with these tender moments, there was something inside her that still made her hesitate. A part that reminded her too much of what it was like to be invisible. And even though he was no longer that cowardly boy, the scar still burned. She knew she couldn't give her whole heart again without first understanding if his love was brave enough to face her in any light, not just in the shadow of casual encounters. That's why she kept a safe distance. And he, who now knew the value of time, didn't push. He waited. He waited because he understood that some reconstructions cannot be rushed. He waited because he loved in a new way, more mature, more patient. And then came the day when she received a letter, unsigned, but with handwriting that she would recognize anywhere. It said, "I don't know if I deserve another chance, but I know that my life has more meaning since I learned to see you, not as a secret but as a mirror. You made me want to be better, and even if it's not with me, I hope that you'll be immensely happy." She read the letter in silence, holding the paper as if it were a piece of the past that had finally healed. She didn't answer, but the next day when she saw him in the hallway, she stopped in front of him, put her hand on his chest and said, "Sometimes what heals the most is knowing that we can trust again." And for the first time there was no fear in either of their eyes. After that sentence, the two began to walk closer, but without rushing. There were no promises, no immediate plans, just a shared frequency, like two rivers that finally learn to flow side by side, respecting each other's spaces, but going in the same direction. Little by little, their lunches turned into long conversations. Their conversations, short walks after work. And on one of those afternoons, he asked her if she would like to visit a project he was developing, a community center in a remote neighborhood where children from vulnerable families received tutoring, food, and affection. She accepted. The following Saturday, she went with him. And when she arrived, she saw a world that reminded her so much of her childhood. The children sat on makeshift chairs with broken pencils in their hands and eyes full of sparkle. She was moved. She remembered the time when she studied with donated books and half-finished notebooks. She walked among them naturally, as if she had always belonged there. He watched her from afar, in silence, enchanted by the way she lit up everything around her. At the end of the visit, a girl approached her and handed her a drawing. "It's you, the girl with the pretty smile," she said. She held the paper with affection, as if it were worth more than any diploma. On the way back, the two didn't say much, but there was something in the air, a silent certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The following week, she began to collaborate on the project in her free time. She brought activities, organized dynamics, and performed minor first aid. And he, once again, learned from her what it means to serve with one's heart. One late afternoon, while they were organizing the children's backpacks, he stopped, looked at her and said, "I don't think I've ever thanked you for teaching me the value of the little things." She smiled with tears in her eyes and replied, "The little things are the only things we take with us." They didn't kiss. They didn't hug. But there was an invisible bond there that was stronger than any physical contact. A bond made of truth, of healed scars and conscious choices. Their relationship was not made up of epic moments, but of simple and constant gestures. It was the coffee left on the table, the note in the notebook, the silence that welcomed them. And little by little, what had once hurt became solid ground. There was no longer any need to prove anything. Their love now was one that did not need to be spoken all the time. It just needed to be lived with dignity. And each day lived like this was, in itself, a response to the past. Time went on, and with it, the bonds between the two grew stronger in a serene way. There was no longer the rush of youth, nor the fear that had previously hindered gestures. There was maturity, and there was a delicate construction made with patience and truth. She was now in her penultimate semester of college, already participating in extension groups and starting to give short lectures on basic care in needy communities. He, in turn, expanded the social project, obtained donations, involved schools, created partnerships with clinics to offer free services. The two were, in a way, part of the same body in motion, but there were still no labels. They still didn't call themselves a couple. They still didn't sleep holding hands. It was as if they both knew that when love is true, it doesn't need to be rushed. It reveals itself completely in its own time. On one of those nights, while they were walking together after a project meeting, he stopped in front of a flower stand and bought a single daisy. He handed it to her without saying anything. She held the flower with her eyes full of tears. It was the same flower from the old drawing he had left on the sink years ago when she had started to pull away. He remembered, and so did she. But now there was no pain. There was affection. The following week, she was honored at the university for her work in the communities. He watched it all from the audience, standing, with tears in his eyes and a heart full of pride. She went up on stage, thanked him, and at the end looked at him. She said nothing, but her look said it all. Later, when they were alone, she confessed, "For a long time, I thought you were just part of my pain. Today I realized that you were also part of what awakened me." He held her hand gently, as if he didn't want to break anything, and replied, "You were my greatest school, and you still are." At that moment, they understood that the love between them had never stopped existing. It had just been transforming. From a hidden passion in the hallway, it had become a partnership. From a wounded silence, it had become a building. And in that reunion, there were no movie kisses, no eternal promises. There was something stronger, a clean start. Further on, as they passed an alley where she used to take a shortcut when she was a maid, he heard her say, "Funny, I used to be afraid to walk here. Today I only feel respect for everything I've experienced." He stopped. He looked at her with admiration. And there, in that alley, he understood. She wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the woman who taught him to love, with truth, with dignity, with presence. And that was worth more than any perfect story, because it was real. The days became simpler, and at the same time more meaningful. They now knew each other's pain, they knew the shadows, and still chose to stay. There was no idealization, there was acceptance. And that, for her, was new. For the first time, someone didn't want to mold her or hide her. They just saw her and welcomed her. She allowed herself to laugh more, make more mistakes, breathe more easily. He, on the other hand, was learning to celebrate without guilt, to not punish himself for the past, to believe that he was still worthy of someone like her. One night, while they were packing boxes for a charity fair, they found, among the donated books, a copy of old stories that she had read as a child. She held the book, moved, and began to tell the stories in detail. He listened, as if listening to rare music. After that night, she started leaving books on the tables at the community center, and the children soon began asking for more. That became a side project, a small library set up by them, with donations from residents and volunteers. Above the door, a simple sign, "Reading is seeing with different eyes." One day, one of the children asked if they were married. She laughed. He laughed too, and the child insisted, "But you seem to be real." It was the most beautiful sentence they had ever heard. Later, on the way back, he said, "I don't think I've ever wished for anything so calmly." She looked at him, rested her head on his shoulder, and replied, "And I never imagined I could trust like this again." It was all so different from the beginning. There was no urgency, no heavy expectations, just the daily decision to stay, and every gesture reinforced that. The note left in the notebook, the coffee made before the shift, the silence respected when one of them just needed to breathe. They weren't living a fairy tale. They lived a real silent pact, and that was what made them strong. Later, he invited her to a lecture he was going to give at a university. She went. She sat in the front row, and when he talked about transformation, he looked at her. She understood. It was about the two of them. After the event, they walked to the coffee shop they had frequented in the early days of their reconnection. He held her hand and said, "Did you know I still have that letter I never gave you?" She smiled. "The one that said you saw me as a mirror." He was silent, surprised, and she added, "I wrote one too, but I never had the courage to give it to you." That night they exchanged letters. They read them in silence, and when they looked at each other again, there was no more past between them. There was present. There was choice, and in that choice, there was the love that had survived time, fear, and shame. A love that could finally exist in the light of day. Time passed. She graduated. The ceremony was simple but full of meaning. He was there in the front row with a bouquet of sunflowers in his hands, the flowers she had mentioned once in a distracted conversation years ago. When her name was called, she went up on stage with her eyes shining and her soul full. When she got off, she hugged her mother tightly. Then she walked over to him. They said nothing. The embrace between them was long, silent, full of everything that had not been put into words over the years. That night he took her to dinner at a modest restaurant, the kind that has more history than sophistication. They sat by the window, shared soup, and laughed as they remembered the past. At one point he looked at her and said, "If you wanted, I would rebuild the world around you." She replied, "No need. I just want someone who will stay when the world shakes." And they both understood that they were ready, not to start something new, but to continue. Something that deep down had never ended. A few days later she received a call. It was from the principal of the public school where she had studied as a child. He invited her to give a talk to the students about overcoming difficulties. She accepted, and she took a small box with her. When she went up on stage, she took her old cleaning lady's uniform out of the box. She told her story. She talked about pain, shame, and courage. And at the end, she looked at the young people and said, "You don't have to start big. You just have to start. The rest is faith, persistence, and self-love." She received a standing ovation. When she left, she saw him waiting at the school door. His eyes were moist and his hands were nervous. "I wanted to show you something." She followed him to a nearby square where a simple building was being finished. A wooden sign had already been installed on the gate. Maria Clara Community Center. She read it in silence. She looked at him, and she understood. It wasn't just a tribute. It was an apology, an acknowledgement, and above all, a choice. Months later, at the foot of that same plaque, they held a small ceremony with friends, children, and neighbors. Nothing extravagant, but full of truth. At the end, a 7-year-old boy gave her a paper daisy. "It's so you never forget that you're important." She smiled. She put the flower in her pocket. And while everyone celebrated, she stepped away for a moment, sat alone on a bench in the square, and looked up at the sky. She took a deep breath. For the first time, without pain, without doubt, without guilt, because she understood that life had given her back everything that had once been taken from her, and twice as much, not with revenge, but with justice, not with anger, but with reparation. The boy who had hidden her now honored her. The woman who had once shrunk now inspired multitudes. And deep down, there was no longer fear, only gratitude. When he came to sit next to her, she held his hand and said softly, "Thank you for losing me. That's how I found myself." He smiled. He didn't answer, because he knew certain answers only make sense in silence. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and leave your like so that more people can learn about narratives that heal, inspire, and transform. Write here in the comments, "I believe in the power of love that starts over," and tell us, have you ever experienced or witnessed a similar story? And don't leave yet. The next video is already appearing on your screen. Click now and get ready for another real, exciting, and unforgettable story which will stir your emotions from beginning to end. I'll meet you there.